Hi, this is Gayle with BERNINA of Naperville. And we are on our lesson 3 of our Twilight Garden sew along, which some of you may or may not know about. You may or may not be doing it. You can check it out over at BERNINAofNaperville.com. However, there is a lesson this month which goes through Stitch Designer. And Haley Grish from BERNINA, she takes the participants through doing a original kind of, you draw it with your finger, and then she takes you through combining a couple of stitches to create an original stitch. But it's the holidays, we're all finishing up projects that we're doing, a lot of gift giving and things like that. So I thought it would be just a good refresher to show you how easy it is to use the Stitch Designer on the Bernina 990, because we've done Stitch Designer projects in a video on our Bernina 880, 790, and the Bernette 79. Those machines all have Stitch Designer as well, but we need to update our Stitch Designer video. So I'm going to be working in the simulator that actually goes on my computer, but I want to remind you that you can plug a mouse into your 990 so that you can kind of have a little bit more control over moving the nodes and things like that, like you see me do in the video. And it doesn't have to be a special Bernina mouse. It can be any wireless mouse or corded mouse with a fob and battery juice, right? All right, so let's go over to the simulator, or you're gonna go over to your Bernina 990, and let's see how cool this Stitch Designer feature is.
Start a little mini lesson with Stitch Designer. And I always like to just use my signature or a name or something like that. We're used to, drawing your name, writing your name, things like that. So I think that this one would be a good one and it doesn't take too long to tweak and get just right. So I'm using the simulator here. It's just a little bit easier for me so you can get a nice crisp view of the screen. So wherever you see my little mouse, that's going to be where you're going to touch with your finger. Okay. So I have put my 40C foot on because that's the foot that you use for your sideways motion stitching. And I'm working in stitch 1. It really doesn't matter what stitch you're picking when you're creating an original drawn stitch. Now, it will make a difference to some degree if you are making a stitch design based off of existing digitized designs. So let's go ahead and go to the very bottom right corner of our screen on our Bernina 990 and select the Stitch Designer icon. Now, a note, if you are using a 790 or an 880, your Stitch Designer icon shows up here in your Stitch Preview field. So here is what Stitch Designer looks like once we open it, and there's lots of different tools in here. You'll recognize that we have an edit button just like we do to enhance our stitches that are selected on our machine. We have a preview area here. We can cycle through stitches, because a decorative stitch is made up of multiple needle penetrations. And one needle penetration counts as a stitch. So as we cycle through, we might have a design with 33 stitches. We could have a design with 100. It just depends on how many needle penetration marks are in there. We have the width and the length of our design will be presented here. And just like your selection tools in the embroidery side, and if you've never been into your embroidery side, well, let me explain. This is select one needle penetration point. This is select some, and this is select all. This is activated for drawing, and this then activates moving. So you can draw a node or you can move a node. Essentially, right here on my straight stitch, I can move that needle penetration mark over, or if I hit my draw, the next lines I make, I've created a stitch. Just like in our sewing side, we have undo, which I just love, right? We can just undo all of those little things that we didn't intend to create. So select all, we'll select all of the stitch. And if we had multiple and we select one, that's just selecting that node or needle penetration mark. But if we select some and we use our cycle up down, if I go up, I've selected just that unit, which I can then, kind of move around however I want, right? Or we can select a lot more. And so whatever is blue is what we've selected. Whatever is white has not been selected. If we go over here to the right side of our screen, you're going to see that we have delete, new, add a stitch, duplicate, mirror, mirror, triple stitch, invert. Let me translate that. That's reverse sew, basically. Then we can show it, we can see how it's going to show stitch out virtually. So that basically will show the path. Does it stitch from down to up or up to down or whatever the case is? And then we have snap to grid, and you'll see that there's a little grid in the background there. And I don't have that on, but if I did, these little guys would go easier to the grid mark. This is good for geometric designs and other things. If I didn't like this part of the middle, for instance, I can use delete and delete it. Now, this is not what I'm aiming for here, so I'm going to hit new. Okay, so let's talk about this field right here that looks a little bit lighter blue than the rest. That's 9 mm. So right now we are staying in the constraints of 9 mm stitching. So to change that, we go to View and we unselect the 9 mm. And each one of these boxes represents a millimeter. And because we're doing a signature, I want to change the direction that this is going to sew. So let's go ahead and select this. Now, this isn't going to stitch this way, but this is how I'm going to use this screen to write my name. Another thing about View is if I zoom out, it's going to allow me naturally to write my name a little bit larger. Okay, so now my name is spelled Gayle, and there's a ton of ways to make a G, right? I can do it like this. But the weird thing about that is the E will end down here on the baseline, and this is still up here. So that doesn't really give a good transition. So, let's undo that and let's try making the G starting on the baseline here. And now we come down and we write. I mean, that kind of looks like a J, but, and then I'm making a little tail on the E so it's connected. So I can write Gayle, 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 like that. Okay. And each one of these little dots, like I mentioned before, is a needle going into the fabric. And when we go to our little sequence button down here, this is 52 stitches, so 52 of 52, right? I can backwards through the design by using the left up arrow, and I can sequence forward. No biggie, right? So there's maybe a lot of work I have to do to this guy to make it suitable, right? So what I'm going to do is first change it back to the way that it's going to stitch. And that's by touching this button. And now you'll notice, if you've ever stitched lettering out in your sewing side, that it kind of stitches in this arrangement. And I'm going to get rid of our little viewer here. And now this is 14.9 millimeters wide. Now, we can tweak this in jumbo stitching. So don't worry about that, right? But I do want to have something that's a little smoother. So what I want to do is zoom in And now if we look at, there's some tools that we need to pay attention to here. And the first one is I told you I can backwards through this stitch by just clicking my up arrow in my, needle penetration 37 of 52. And then I can keep touching and you can see how it's cycling back. But that takes a lot of clicking of a mouse. So let's touch the actual numbers and start at stitch 1. And now we're right there at 1. Moving on to number 2, you can see that's 2, 3, 4, 5. But it needs to just be a little smoother. And also, I would like it to be a little bit larger. So I have select sum on. You'll notice that as I cycled through, these stitches turn blue. Well, that's like a little group. So that means I can kind of move these guys as a unit to make my G a little bit larger. Likewise, let's go back to select 1 and then select sum again. And you have to make sure you pick going the right direction. So I'm trying to pick this guy, right? And I want to move this so it's a little bit lower like that. Now, if we go to select all, we're more at like 17.9. And let's zoom out. And now another thing I can do is hit my node there, then select sum, like so, and move. So that little guy is like that. Now let's go back to select 1, and we're going to do this. We're going to say select sum, and we're going to move. Oops, I didn't grab the right node there. Hang on. Let's try that again. We have to always select the last node to move a whole unit. Okay, let's work with this now. So let's go back to one node at a time, and we're going to click our numbers and go back to stitch 1. So I'm going to move this node, and notice I'm on move rather than create a node. So we're going to move this to start just like right there. And now when we create a node, we always want to go after. So if we want to create a node, we have to have 1 selected. Then when we click, that's node 2. Then node 3 would be this one, 4, 5, 6, and now we can put 1 here. And I'm cycling through until I see like, a gap where I need more nodes. And you can see here I'm at 12, but I really need 1 there. Cycle down. Let's put 1 there. Let's cycle down. Maybe 1 in here. Cycle down. And now let's put a couple here. So there's 1, and now there's another. And now let's just work with the G here like this. So we're going to go to our move icon now because we want to smooth things out. So how do we want to make this G look pretty, right? And I can add more nodes as I see fit, if I want to in this case. That look pretty. And then I can kind of just start smoothing things out and see if I can make it how I may actually, write this. I mean, my penmanship is awful. So we kind of want to maybe make it look better than my penmanship. I think that looks pretty good. And now let's cycle. Oop, I can put a little dot there. And what I'm trying to do is make this A look more rounded. Oops. You always have to be mindful of the direction that you're going, or else you can, kind of put a node somewhere that looks like it's in outer space. And I'm using the term node and penetration point interchangeably. I think those of you that have the Bernina embroidery software will recognize node as something that we use when we do reshape. And hopefully you're kind of catching on to what I'm doing here. I'm glad that I have a short name for this class. You can see that writing out a sentence could take a little bit of time. And I'm going to use my two fingers on my screen and I'm going to scroll up. And look, you can see I accidentally made a note in outer space, but it's a good thing we have undo. And now let's put one there. And now, okay, so this is good for now. So let's work on smoothing. So I'm going to change to my move icon. And I want to kind of move that guy up a little bit so that it'll meet my G in the right spot. You can see the preview over here. But I want to give it, some flow there. And now kind of zooming in on my E, make it a little bit more rounded. And sometimes I like a few more stitches at the top of an L, like you see there. Let's take two fingers and swipe up now and get to that Y. And that's a long place between dots. So why don't we just add another little node just there? Go back to our move tool so we can move it into just the right spot. Okay, work on our Y. Okay, two fingers to scroll. And now we just have the A to contend with here. All right, let's zoom out just a little bit. I mean, I think this looks pretty good. So when you're happy and you know it, you can save it, right? But let me show you a couple more things here. We talked about select one and select some. There's also select all. That's the last one here. If we click this, now the whole thing is selected, and I could, if I wanted, I could apply triple stitch. And triple stitch will just make this go stitch, 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 so that the lines are thicker. But I'm going to be stitching this out with like a 28 weight thread, so it's going to look pretty thick already. Another thing that we have is invert. So what that means is that if I click this, it's going to stitch backwards and start with the tail of Gayle and go backwards. And this isn't a practical application for this in this scenario, but that is an option, right? And then we have stitch it. So it's actually going to show how it stitches. This can be helpful to make sure that you don't have like weird things in your stitch. So now that I think it looks good to me, I'm going to go ahead and select the green check mark. Now that puts this here in our viewing area, but this isn't saved yet. If we were to turn our machine off or pick a new stitch, all of our hard work is going to go away. So we want to save this. So we're going to hit the little download button right here at the corner, the bottom right corner of the stitch viewing area. And we're going to pick a new stitch. And I'm calling this Gayle 1. And I'm going to save this on my machine. And now we can go in here and you're going to see a lot of Gayles on here because I played around with this a little bit. So let's go ahead and pick our stitch now, and you can see there it is, right? And I like it, but let's examine it a little bit. Do you notice that this isn't quite, let's say if 9 millimeters is almost half an inch, then this is maybe 3/4 of an inch or something like that. I might want it to be a little bit larger, just for a little bit more definition. So let's go into our edit, and now let's go to jumbo stitch. And I'm sure you're familiar, if you've played with jumbo stitch at all on your Bernina 990, you know that you can go up by 100% increments, or you can go up by 1% increments. If you press the plus sign, you're going up by 1%. You press plus 100, you're going up by 100%. And that's keeping our proportions the same. But what if I wanted to squish it a little bit narrower? I could get my proportions taken off, and I'm going to go and just squish it a little bit like that, because this is a nice way to alter without having to move nodes around in your stitch editor, right? So now let's put our proportions back on, and now let's do, that's a good size, I guess, about 52.3, something like that. And now let's go ahead and save this one as Gayle 2. And now we have Gayle 2. So now, as luck would have it, the simulator does not allow me to save my stitches and bring them over to my machine. So I have created these again on my machine. So it might not be exactly what you're seeing here, but you'll get the idea when we stitch these out. And this is always like, another cool thing is if we stitch these out and we see some longer stitches where we'd like to alter it in some way, no worries. You can always take one of the stitches that you've saved Now we're going to just pick our stitch, right? So now we just simply go into Stitch Editor. Let's zoom out a little bit, shall we? And now you can kind of look, from your stitch out at any problem areas. So I'm going to go to Move. And this one kind of was not quite as smooth as I thought it was going to be. So then I can fix that. It looks like I had a little problem though. Sometimes when I move them, I add a node, right? So we're going to just smooth this little area out. There we go. So you always have an option to tweak it. Now, one thing you need to be mindful of though, if you do tweak, you have to save it again. So once you have, like something that you're totally in love with, you say, okay, and then you're going to save it and we can call it like Gayle Final. All right, let's stitch it.
All right, what do you think? Are you all going to be navigating your Bernina 990s with a mouse? I don't know why I don't have one next to my machine all the time, honestly. But anyway, hope you got something out of this video. And if you would like to see other videos, other tutorials, little snippets, Ben-Hur of tutorials, whatever, we have them all at our Bernina of Naperville YouTube channel, which is easy to find. It's youtube.com/Bernina of Naperville. And there you can like, comment, and subscribe. All right, now sign your work, everybody. Cheers.